Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Dr. Cathleen King, Doctorate of Physical Therapy, is a leading expert in neuroplasticity education, mind-body healing methods, neurophysiology of trauma and attachment, and emotional regulation practices. Having personally healed from complex trauma and illness, Dr. King offers a path to healing through brain retraining and nervous system regulation. As CEO and founder of the Primal Trust Academy and community, she empowers others to find freedom from chronic illness, stress, and trauma. Well, Kathleen, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here. I'm so glad to have the conversation today.
I'm looking forward to having you tell us a little bit about how you got into the work you do and what drives your passion for it.
Sure. Well, I work with people mostly who have chronic illness or chronic stress or trauma. And we work with the brain and the nervous system to help them learn how to consciously self-regulate their biology. And this work came to me by my own journey of having to learn how to consciously self-regulate my own biology after a long history of trauma, followed by a long history of chronic illness, going from doctor to doctor year after year, getting to the point where my function was very poor. I was mostly homebound, sometimes even bedbound. I had a lot of diagnoses ranging from Lyme disease to mold toxicity to chronic parasite, viral, digestive issues, thyroid issues, CPTSD, all sorts of hormone imbalances. And it was pretty debilitating. My system was so locked up that I couldn't hardly handle light or sound. I had to be in a dark, quiet room. My nervous system was just so shut down.
Compromised, yeah.
Compromised. And, the medical system, they're like, oh, it's this infection, it's this toxin, here's the latest lab test, it's actually this, or it's this mineral imbalance. Oh, no, it's your genetics. I went down that rabbit hole year after year after year, and I thought, there's got to be a common denominator with this list, this pile of diagnoses. And eventually, my own background is that I'm a physical therapist and I worked with chronic pain. And I knew that the brain processed chronic pain. And to help heal chronic pain, you have to change the way your brain processes. So I started using some of those tools almost 20 years later on myself, and they worked. And they helped my brain processing improve. And they helped my infection symptoms and toxin symptoms to improve. But ultimately, they helped me to get my function in my life back. And so now I teach others what I did.
Excellent. What'd you do? Tell us, teach us.
Well, it started because I'm a physical therapist. I understand sequencing of things. And I decided to start with exercises that I gave people when their nervous system was really out of whack that are called functional neurology exercises. They're eye exercises. And these eye exercises help to improve brain processing. They also help with vagus nerve communication. And the eyes are one of the most direct ways to impact the brain. And so there's simple eye tracking exercises that can help not only calm the nervous system, but improve brain processing, especially if you've had a lot of inflammation. And I think that's one of my secret sauces is that I use this physical therapy thing, eye exercises, for Lyme disease and mold toxicity. And people hadn't put those two things together back then. Now many people are doing this. And that's started to get my function going. And then I added things like brain retraining or limbic system retraining and vagus nerve toning, somatics, inner attachment repair, and trauma processing. And I wove it all together over a period of a couple years and slowly walked my way back into life.
So you mentioned inner attachment repair. What is that referring to?
Yeah, good question. Ultimately, I think it's about being able to have healthy relationships, both with ourselves and with others. And a lot of times, depending on how we were raised, relationship or attachment can be scary, and we develop strategies to stay safe. So the repair is to become aware of the strategies that we use in relationship, whether we avoid them and stay a few feet away, or whether we cling to them, hoping they don't leave, or sometimes a combination of those two things, and become aware of our coping strategy and find a way to stay in connection, even though there's some vulnerability. And that has a lot to do with our relationship with parents, with spouses, with children, with coworkers. And I think ultimately with ourselves, we have to reattach to who we are, our true self, and wounded parts of us, our inner child, things like that. So that's how I would describe inner attachment repair in a nutshell.
Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I think in terms of attachment theory and all the work that's been done with that, where they made observations about children and toddlers and infants and the mothers and fathers, and they were able to learn quite a bit about the styles that we develop for attachment or fear of attachment or anxiety with attachment, et cetera. And what I'm getting from what you're saying is that it's useful to apply that to my inner relationship, to my memory of myself at 8 years old.
Yeah.
Or at 14 when there was a very difficult situation I was handling. And now, if I'm an adult and anything that happens in my life results in me saying consciously or unconsciously, oh, this is like what happened when I was 14, all of a sudden, here comes my 14-year-old sense of sensibilities and coping mechanisms, which I mean, I wasn't a bad 14-year-old, but it's nothing compared to what I have at this level with my doctorate experience. But all of that stuff, my doctorate and all those years of therapy experience gets floating off into space over here. And I'm this 14-year-old automatically churning through what I did to survive it when I was 14.
Yeah.
And so if I, with this ability to step back and watch, can see myself go into 14-year-old traumatized mode, I can do some comforting and nurturing with that 14-year-old self. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, it is about reparenting ourselves. It's about finding ways to not get hijacked by that 14-year-old or 5-year-old while we still stay in connection and feel what that part of us is feeling. So it's not about suppressing it or dissociating. It's about a very real experience of showing up for that wounding and yet responding in a higher and better way while acknowledging the wounding that might be coming up at the same time.
Yeah, and I like the idea of asking that part of me that was younger that has downloaded this belief about this. What did I make that mean about me? What meaning have I given this life experience and what I came to believe about my life as a result of it? That if I understand it better, I can work with it more.
Yeah, I love that question. What did I make this mean? And even now, I think that that question is almost like the essence of brain retraining. What meaning are we giving this situation? What meaning did I give this situation? And ultimately being willing to decide differently.
So, are there brain retraining kind of standards like simple breath work or little calisthenic exercises that you give pretty much across the board to people without having to individualize it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our program is a program given to thousands. It's an algorithm. There are algorithms behind these things. And brain retraining, I studied a lot of programs, looked at what the common denominator was, and I came up with 3 steps. And I call it the ABC brain retraining method. Pretty much all brain retraining asks you to become aware consciously of what you're thinking, feeling, believing right now. From that awareness, we pattern interrupt, meaning you're interrupting your habitual rumination, your habitual going down the rabbit hole, your unconscious habit, your pattern interrupting and just becoming very conscious in this moment. And then from there, it's about being in our body in this present moment for just a short period of time, whether that's breathing to be in the body or some type of movement or some type of action to sort of wake you up in this body right now. I tend to have people do breathing. And then the third phase is a redirect or a shifting of focus, or maybe even shifting to meet yourself with compassion, but it's some type of shift to light up a different neural pathway. So you come in with your habitual neural pathway, you interrupt it, you refocus to the present moment, and then you shift to either trying to find a better feeling thought or shift to a different behavior or action. We tend to do a lot of creative visualization in this last phase to self-produce an elevated emotional state to shift the way that the neural pathways are connecting and to go from a negative state to more of a positive state. Sometimes, however, I'll have them shift to going inward and replacing guilt, fear, shame with compassion. That could be a shift in just being with yourself with compassion. It could be a shift of an action of like, oh, here I am just habitually eating this snack and not thinking because I'm just trying to get away from feelings and stopping and being like, okay, I'm going to take myself for a walk. That's a higher and better way to deal with the discomfort. So I would say that would be the algorithm that I see. And there's a lot of different ways to spin the algorithm and give people different tools that are customized to their situation.
So you started with the ABCs and then you said awareness. And I thought, okay, there'll be an
Yeah, there is a
awareness, there'll
C.
be a B, and there'll be a C. And
Yes, there is.
so let me just say that when you were giving the explanation, my mind was showing me two or three steps before you got to the behavior. And I think what was happening is you were saying that if I shift into awareness, that is the pattern disruptor.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. And some people, there'll be a phrase to like make it overt, like cancel, not let it go. They might have a phrase to interrupt, but truly the awareness, I'm right here. I hear this. I feel this. I'm making meaning of this is the pattern disruptor. B is actually for body and breath to help solidify that interrupt. And
Bring the
C
awareness into the body and the physical
into into the
sensations.
body. And C is choose or carve a new neural pathway or create a different scenario. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Excellent. And so the ways to in the body could be the breathing or it could be the movement. And then the creating the new has to do with that creative visualization you're talking about or shifting some internal focus so that you experience things differently.
Yeah. And this has to be done over and over and over again. That's the, neuroplasticity happens through repetition. Rewiring the brain happens through repetition. Having a way that you shift yourself and you know exactly what to do. So you don't have to stop and think about like, oh, how am I going to shift my brain state? It's a practiced algorithm. And so you can do it at will over and over. And that practice was extremely helpful for me when I was suffering with chronic symptoms to teach my brain to get off from focusing on the symptoms, on the suffering, and back onto finding life and finding purpose again.
So that's what you're calling brain retraining.
Yeah.
Okay. That's like the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the interruption of this unproductive pattern that's gotten locked in between my brain functioning and the body and all of the hormones and everything else.
Yeah.
What's next? I mean, like, how do you move from there? If you start somebody and they're doing those ABCs well, then what are you looking for?
So for me, when people can self shift their own limbic state, meaning that at will, they can go from a state of fear or upset and at will shift their emotional state, then I think they're ready to go deeper into the body, into somatic practices, into more trauma processing, potentially even. And so I give them somatic exercises to spend more time in the body. Sometimes it's somatic movement of just subtle different patterns that are similar. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Feldenkrais or Alexander or Thomas Hanna.
Right.
That was my training. And so I teach them how to form a new relationship with the body through doing very subtle movements that take people in and out of different holding patterns of the body. And the reason why you need to be able to shift your limbic state first is because sometimes when we go into the body, we start getting a lot of uncomfortable sensations, and the mind likes to make meaning right away. That's how it just interrupts and it starts giving you a story. And you've got to learn like, oh, here I go again, and to be able to redirect back into the body. And the limbic system retraining really prepares those neural pathways to be able to come into the body and stay present and not go off into that meaning-making machine, which is a distraction away from a lot of our wounding. Does that make sense? Why I would do
Yes,
one first? Yeah.
absolutely. That why you would do them in that order. And
Yeah.
my mind now is just trying to get to lock in what you were saying about being in the body and then have kind of an auto response come up. And if I've done the ABC work enough, I can notice that I'm going into that false, maybe a part of my mind has labeled it protective, kind of a pattern, but it's a reflexive kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I can keep myself from going down that path and stay right here and process something differently.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're able to actually process what is coming up because the processing doesn't happen with mental thought. It
And
happens with presence.
and how do you define process?
Process is allowing energy to be felt, seen, witnessed, and heard, whether that energy is a strong emotion or a strong sensation, and watching it as a curious observer so that it can complete its movement through the body. Sometimes that movement might complete in the form of shaking. Sometimes it might be like a yell. Sometimes it might be just falling over and weeping. It's an energetic process the body wanted to go through, but it couldn't complete itself because the mind got in the way, made a story to keep it trapped in the body. So I see processing as being able to hold space for what is, staying neutral and allowing the body to unwind that energy in whatever way the body wants to do it.
Excellent. So in this work, when you're using the word process, you mean being open to letting these energies move through me while I observe them without going into the contraction or tightness or tension that's driven by the meaning I've given it. I can get tight or tense or do the shaking, as you say, if it's a part of what the body wants to do to move the energy through it.
Yeah. Yeah. If we
Like
can
the
stay out of the story, the body will do all sorts of things.
It sounds like you've been exposed to Peter Levine's work. And
Yeah.
so now I'm experiencing and I'm not trying to control it with that conscious logical part of my mind. Then what?
Then there's a whole inner journey from there. Our subconscious, I think, starts to trust us to experience more, to experience that which was never allowed. And sometimes I think even generational stuff. And we become a body that is willing to feel the feels and to meet that which was abandoned and lost and exiled. And it's often the process of forming a very rich inner world with parts of us, lots of parts of us, the reclamation of that family within us, the literal aspects of self. And I think that in that wholeness that we're coming back to, we also gain more access to connection with source, with the earth, with each other. So it's a rich relationship that starts to unfold, both internally and externally, and a never-ending journey as long as we're alive.
You're feeding into several things that work with the work I do with people. The idea that people say, well, how many of these worksheets do I have to do? And the answer is an infinite number until it's complete. And I'll never be complete because every day is another day and I'm growing and changing and I'm not the same person I was before. Also, the idea of the cross-generational patterns that you mentioned, I think of things like family constellations work. Do you know about the family
Yeah. Oh,
constellations work?
yeah, definitely.
And Mark
It's
Wolin's book, It Didn't Start With You. And
yeah.
what I like to tell people is, even if you've got a thought structure for that from some book like Mark Wolin's, or you've taken family constellations work, that you're probably better off leaving that thought structure, the meaning you would give it, aside and just let the experience happen and move it through to completion, like feel it fully all the way through completion, whatever that means for you in terms of being able to move and speak and give voice to these energies that you would label as emotions. And then maybe at the end, maybe you come back and try and make some meaning of it at the
Yeah.
intellectual level if you still feel the need. Does that hold true for
Yeah.
you?
I think that if we know that the brain is constantly trying to make meaning, and by doing that, we are interrupting the actual processing. If we can become aware of how our brain does that and say, oh, here I am. I'm trying to create a construct here to feel more in control, usually of some sort, or understand. I'm going to pause on that. I'm going to go into the unfamiliar and just let this thing unfold as a very conscious habit. Then I think these experiences can become so much more rich and rewarding and deeper.
Well, and
And
informative, right? They
yeah,
inform us.
yeah. And I think at the end, there's a time where a meaning just drops in, and it's like, oh, and it comes to you in a surprising way. It's not something you have to figure out. It's like, oh, that's what was happening here. And it's usually drops in as a surprise, I think, when it's more aligned and when it's a more aligned meaning, if there is meaning to anything at all. That's a whole other question.
Right. Agreed. And this is like what Krishnamurti and David Bohm would talk about as this fundamental flaw in our process of thought as it relates to our human experience.
Yeah.
And so if there's a flaw in that process, and that flaw has given rise to this pain or fear or sadness or shame or guilt, and then I try to use that same process to resolve that, it just gets more intensified. So if I can put all of that aside and ask to be shown something else, if I can coach myself into this space through what you're talking about, this brain retraining, the ABCs, the awareness, the B is for in the
Body,
body or
breath.
behavior or breath, and then the C is for creating something new, right? Rewriting. My experience for myself and the people I work with is the first thing that happens when we try to do that is my fear response kicks up and says, no, you can't look at this. You can't go over here. And I tell people, expect that and breathe and soften through it. Because when you first start asking the fearful part of your mind to show you what it is hiding from you, it doesn't believe you mean it. You've had several decades of every time it started to come close, you'd go, oh, and run the other way to behaviors or drugs or something. And so now that you become enlightened and you're working with Catherine King and she's got this little trick, and you go to your fearful part of your mind and say, hey, come on, Catherine, we can do this. They go, you don't mean it. Yeah, that's not going to happen. And so over time, if I'm willing to do the process to take behaviors and take steps in behavior, not just my thoughts and words, but behaviors like your brain retraining, et cetera, there's that fearful part of my mind that's paying attention. And over time, my acting like I really want to know can convince that fearful part of my mind that I'm willing or able and willing
Yeah.
to see what it's been hiding from me without being destroyed by it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. It's a protector because it doesn't think that you can stay consciously present while experiencing that wounding, because at one point you couldn't. And so it remembers that. So as we practice presence without story, presence with our emotion, we start over time convincing that part of us that we can handle it now. And that's what happened with me. I was doing my little stories. I started doing brain retraining, and about 6 months in, old memories started coming and old flashbacks of what really happened as a child. And I was 40 years old. I didn't remember any of it, but and I was like, when it came, I'm like, oh, there it is. That makes sense now. And it was totally able to wrap my arms around it. And had it come any earlier before brain retraining, it would have knocked me sideways and God knows what. So my subconscious, some aspect, trusted that I could finally handle it. And I say this because it's important to know that when you do go on this pathway, you might have things bubble up, and they will bubble up when it's time. And you have these tools, and I do believe if you practice them, you can be with what comes up.
Excellent. When you're talking about that, I just flashed on Dr. John Sarno's work. Are you familiar with his work?
He was my first mentor about 2000, year 2000, when I was studying to be a physical therapist. That's where I really gained a lot of this concept was originally from him, the idea of pain and what's actually happening. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Sarna.
And the thing that made me think of it in that point is that you were just talking about if you had tried to go there earlier, or if it had tried to come up earlier, your body would probably have produced such an intense response that the physical pain and or tension and or terror would have been so strong that you would have left the pursuit of this discovery, you would have pushed it further away simply because I don't have time for that now. I got to go to the chiropractor and the orthopedic surgeon and schedule my back surgery, et cetera.
Yeah.
When in fact, what you learned from him, and I've lived so often, is most of he coined the term tension myoneural syndrome, meaning tension that's locked in the muscles and nerves of the body. And when it's activated, it can create a tension that literally restricts blood flow to tissue. And if it's a very small reduction in blood flow to tissue, it's enough to initiate excruciating pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real distracting factor,
Yeah.
real intense pain, either in a little muscle group here or in the whole calf, can shut down everything in my awareness, because that's the only thing right now. I got to fix that pain, right? And he was able to unlock how awareness of that and willingness to just breathe and soften and talk to the body rather than go and try and fix it with a physical intervention opens a whole new dimension of awareness for me.
Yes. One of his books called The Divided Mind, one of the best things I ever read. It really helped me to understand that the drive to fix it was a coping strategy created by my psyche that was a path that my protective parts thought would be better for her to try to go fix this pain than look at the wounding, because that's not fixable. This could mean she's unlovable. We don't want her to see that. So let's just keep her whole life chasing this back pain and trying to fix that as a decoy, because we don't want her to feel existentially worthless. This is better than that.
Exactly. It's decisions like that we make instantaneously at what some would call the unconscious level that all of us were carrying around hundreds and dozens of hundreds of them. And whenever they get activated, the way I talk about it is it can get activated by whatever interpretation I choose and place on the external life events right now, then that becomes my new reality. That becomes what I believe is true because it helped me survive this kind of a disruptive event in the past, and I'm going to use it again.
Yep. We give it that meaning, and it follows us for a long time until we challenge it.
So other aspects of the work you do with people, where do you go next? Somebody's starting to get better. Somebody's having less of the physical pain or the emotional disruption. Now what?
We encourage them to find what their values are and what they really want to be spending their time with, because a lot of times illness, pain, that becomes their identity. All they want, the one thing they want is just to feel better. They actually don't have any other goal than that. So as their symptoms start to decrease, I try to redirect them, reorient them to another purpose. Instead of just getting better, how do you want to live? What do you value? What are you here for? And then that'll bring up a whole other slew of resistance patterns that we get to work through, because ultimately we are afraid of expressing our true nature. We're afraid of failure. We're afraid we don't get to have what we want. And so you start working on new things, and it's another journey.
Yes, absolutely. The idea of fear of stepping into what I might be good at.
Yeah.
And of course, the layers of meaning I've given that could be because I've lost track of how many times I've got a preteen or a teen in the office brought in by parents, and they were doing fabulously well at whatever their chosen sport was. And then all of a sudden, they just wanted to quit, or they just couldn't follow the ball or whatever. How many times that we were able to uncover for those preteen or teens that they felt like they were hurting their best friend who was no good at that sport, or they felt like, if I'm really good at that, I'm not going to fit in with this group of friends over here. It's amazing the stories that people create, that we all create, that then drive our behavior without us being aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating. And so we start to encourage people to take these action steps towards living their purpose, their goal, their values, and to consciously chart what the resistance is that comes up so that they can start to see and master their unconscious resistance and develop strategies of choice, knowing, okay, every time I go to write that blog post, I start to feel really tired, or I do this or I do that, and I won't let myself write it. And so once they develop, at first you've got to just see the resistance, and then you have to develop a strategy like, okay, this is going to happen. What emotions are coming up? What internal stories are coming up? What kind of, beliefs are coming up that I need to look at and work with, with some of the methods we have, or maybe with a therapist? And what kind of action strategy can I come up with so that I can choose over that resistance incrementally? So we help them walk that path.
Excellent. Excellent. And the idea of having a toolkit for dealing with those emotions as they come up, or the physical expression of those emotions as they come up, is one of the best things I have. The body of work, several different bodies of work that I integrate, they're built on, let's first help you understand how you're creating the emotions you experience, and then what you might do with that energy to learn from it and or dissipate it. And so if you're recycling through this, now I'm feeling better about the physical problems and the limitations and all of the parasite symptoms I had and everything else.
Yeah.
But now I'm starting to write that blog post, and here it comes again. I don't have to go back to square one. I can just pick up the tools and start managing that energy and asking to be shown, what is it in me that's coming up as very meaningful, and what's the goal of this resistance?
Mhm.
And if I can become aware of it, I might find a different way to reach that goal other than just procrastinating the blog post.
Yeah. We become conscious of the resistance. And this is something we do in our level 2 program. We have them look at their goal, look at where they're at now, and experience trying to take that action step towards the goal and experience the resistance now. And we pause and we let the brain, the conscious brain, see the difference. This is what I want. This is what's coming up. And I usually ask a question like, what was the original event that created this resistance? And maybe they don't need to know, but their subconscious knows and it can look for that. And is that original event really applicable right now to this situation, writing the blog? So that in somewhere in the brain, it can kind of work this out. And we do this 2-point active awareness a lot. And I have them practice that so that, yeah, they start to question, okay, this feels like writing the blog is when I was laughed at in second grade. Is that really happening? And do I want what happened in second grade to limit my life purpose? And now they can actually choose maybe over that. Or if it's really intense, they might have to take that to a therapist and say, this is what's keeping me. I know what it is now. Can you help me process that?
And one of the systems of therapy that's been so influential for me is called coherence therapy. Are you familiar with coherence therapy?
A little
And
bit.
the
Yep.
and the idea of memory reconsolidation.
Yep.
And this is what you're describing right now. And the only difference between what you just described and the memory reconsolidation is that if I asked myself, when did this original dynamic come up in me? And I flash on, oh, I was in eighth grade.
Mhm.
And then I ask myself at that intellectual level, well, am I an eighth grader? No. Am I adult? Yes. Do I have the resources? Yes. That's here still at the intellectual level.
Yeah.
But if I can let myself remember what it felt like to be in that eighth grader's body, what
Yeah.
were the visceral changes? What were the thoughts? What were the emotions? What were the sights and sounds I can remember? And then flip to today. Where am I today? What are my sights and sounds? What are my capabilities as an adult? And move back and forth in this repeated juxtaposition of these two internal experiences of truth. I know that's exactly what my truth was when I was in eighth grade.
Mhm.
and I can breathe and soften and remember and feel what my truth is now as an adult. And if I bounce back and forth, that creates this thing we call memory reconsolidation, or the rewriting of the neural pathways and this visceral body response. And my mind, outside of my conscious logical mind, says, wait a minute, both these can't be true. Let's blend these. Let's make something that works.
Yeah.
And often people leave those kinds of sessions not knowing why or how they feel so much better, but not having the resistance to do the activity that was bringing up their procrastination or whatever.
Yeah. That I would say that's very similar. We do a little bit of somatic presencing to what's coming up, constantly toggling between now, past, future, and letting the brain in its own wisdom reroute, rewire, and make a new association.
Yeah, I like to talk to people about watching and questioning rather than figuring it out.
Yeah.
Living in that questioning mode rather than demanding an answer, just being in that wide open space saying, I wonder what this might lead to. I wonder why I was doing that. And not trying to formulate a logical set of, and this must be, and that must be it. Letting the ahas happen kind of organically, you might say, or in this alchemical process is what we've experienced in the work that I do, and it sounds like in the work you do, as far more beneficial and lasting.
Yep. I think that this process that I often just call a 2-point awareness has been the single most beneficial thing I've done in healing, because we do have to find a way to feel what's actually there and come up with a new association to be able to choose against it and do something different. And I'm so surprised that things that were such highly charged things for me for so many years are no longer the case. And that's amazing. It's amazing. We really can heal trauma.
It's amazing. It still blows me away in my own life and in the people I work with, that often after this kind of a process has worked through, I'll have a hard time trying to remember why I was generating so much upset about X, Y, or Z situation in my life.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, our perception, our belief about something is what provides so much context for our limbic system. And when that belief has shifted, we literally can't feel the same way we did before.
Excellent. Well, I'm wondering if you would be willing to just get centered and consider this. What's something we've already talked about that you want to go back and highlight, or an aspect of your work that we haven't even touched on yet that you want to include here before we run out of time?
I've been thinking a lot about how we have so many tools now. And in fact, like, we know these things work, and you can get on even Instagram and learn all sorts of somatic tools, and we have books everywhere. There isn't a lack of how to get better. My curiosity has been, why don't we choose to do so? What keeps us from taking these steps of doing these practices, of seeing a therapist and doing things like this? And that's a discussion. I don't have the full answer. I'd be curious to hear from you thoughts and going back and forth. But, people are going to hear this today. And then what? I was just teaching a workshop this weekend and at the Omega Institute, and everybody loved it. And I said, you know what? I'm so happy that you love these tools. And my concern is that within 48 hours to 2 weeks, this excitement is going to wear off, and you're not going to do this thing that right now just helped you feel amazing. Why is that? Start asking yourself, why don't I feel like doing this? What's coming up? Why don't I choose to do the thing that I know would make me feel better? And I think that is such a dilemma of the human condition, that we don't do the things we know would help us be free of suffering. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, generally speaking, it's because I'm holding within me a set of reasons that are in the unconscious realm that make it important for me to avoid that. So in the coherence therapy model, they call that the pro-symptom position. Why am I creating this pattern of behavior or procrastination or anxiety or depression? It's not because I'm damaged or broken or sick. It's because some part of me believes it's going to protect me from something or help me accomplish something else. And when I uncover that set of reasons or dynamics within me, meanings within me that make it important for me to create this anxiety or this procrastination or this pattern of disrupted relationships, then I've got something I can see at the conscious logical level. Sometimes I relabel it as, oh, guess what? This isn't a problem. This is the best, smartest, healthiest defense mechanism I've ever had. And I've just been labeling it a problem. What is it? It's I don't stay in abusive relationships. Oh, okay. So I relabel it and all of a sudden it's not a problem. Or I see the goal and I see an entirely different way to step into a solution for that goal that uses other resources I have, and this other behavior just falls away. I don't need to avoid a difficult conversation with somebody because I no longer have that younger part of me that thinks if I get scolded, my life might end, right? So I can have a difficult conversation with somebody and they can have all their emotions up and I can sit here with compassion. It's usually there will be a reason I'm doing what I'm doing. This is one of the things that if you learn to work with resistance and you don't call it a disease process or a sign that the person's too wounded or broken, but you assume that it's part of their internal wisdom. And it's usually, if it's going against what my conscious logical mind wants, it's usually either fear or it's because my unconscious knows something much, much bigger that it knows I need to be protected from until I develop other resources or other strengths.
Yeah. I love that. That makes so much sense. I remember one person, I can't remember who it was, but I think it was Carolyn Miss. She was talking about what keeps people from living their life purpose. And she said a lot of people, if they don't have the self-esteem to handle the backlash of doing what they want to do, that there's a part of them that will not let them go out there and be seen yet. And this is why they aren't making the steps to do it, because on some level, that will cause people to eventually, criticize. And this protective part's like, you can't handle that yet. So we're just not going to go be seen. And I thought that was brilliant. And it really struck me because I was somebody who couldn't write the blog posts for like a year. And now, I write all the time. And it's true. I don't think I could have handled quite yet the criticism that I definitely get now back then. So that makes sense. And I also love how you said this is wisdom, and to relabel it, not like, oh, I've got this problem, but what is this wise part of me? What is its desire here? And to have that kind of a conversation.
And or not just this wise part of me, what's the wisdom in this urge?
What's the wisdom? Yeah, that I like that reframe. What's the wisdom in this urge? That's a beautiful statement. I like that.
Because
Yeah.
most of us are being driven by that internal mechanism of protection and survival and whatever, and it's just not very well sorted out. It's been kind of compiled by us in a haphazard way because it comes down from the bloodline and because we're living in a culture that's mistrained us to believe that our emotions and responses are caused by people and things outside of us. And so we haven't grown accustomed to what would it be like if every time I feel discomfort, I take a calming breath and turn inside and ask myself, how am I creating this discomfort? Or alternatively, I could ask myself, what am I making this situation mean? And if that's the beginning of my response, now I'm in that questioning, I'm able to learn, I'm teachable in the moment, and I'm undoing some of the levels of conditioning of my culture that have trained me to believe you made me angry, you hurt my feelings, you're scaring me, you offended me, that's wonderful, that's tragic, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That
I love
conditioning
that.
has to be undone. We have to,
Mm-hmm.
each of us has to recognize we have been brainwashed and conditioned.
Yeah.
So how do you undo that? You start with questioning is my first idea. Gentle childlike questioning of, okay, what's going on in me? What am I feeling? What am I making it mean? How am I creating this feeling?
I love that because then you're open to another story than the habitual one that you tell yourself. That's wise. I like that. It is interesting that with people with chronic illness, there are so many tools, there's so many resources, there's programs that are showing like you can get better. And so yeah, I want to know how to help bridge that gap between knowing and taking action. So this conversation is helpful for me. I've definitely grasped a few nuggets there.
Yeah, people do this when they're ready and the resources are available, right? One of the exercises I used to give people was to create some observations that they could use to help ground them if they were spinning out in some negative thought. And on the list of possible observations were things like, if I could have done differently, I would have. So I can get rid of this blaming thing and this beating myself up because I didn't do this sooner. I didn't do this sooner because I didn't have the resources and I didn't have the awareness or I didn't have the personal internal strength. And if I have it now, good, I'll do it, move on. At the same time, that's true. There's no value in me spending another 10 or 15 minutes or 13 years of my life beating myself up because I didn't do it earlier, unless I have a time machine, in which case I can go back and fix it.
Yeah. I think that thought was one of the most healing things is that there were an infinite number of forces at play when I made that decision back then. And I truly couldn't have done it differently. Even with my knowing better, my unconscious still back then was stronger in whatever way. And to accept that I did what I did because that's all I could have done, given all of the circumstances and forces that led to that moment was huge, especially with a lot of the programming I had about sin and guilt and shame and all of that. Letting myself have permission to do what I did has been one of the most freeing things I've done in my life.
Excellent. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, if people want to reach out to you, how do you prefer they contact you?
Sure. I have a website, primaltrust.org, and I have a free book that I wrote. It's called How Healing Happens, and it's about 130 pages. It goes over all the science behind what I teach, lots of practices and examples. It's a great way to get an idea about this work for free. And you can download that on my website under the free resources. I also have other free resources. So I'd say that's the best way to get to know my work, see if it resonates, see if brain retraining, nervous system work is something that would be beneficial for you, and go from there.
And it's primaltrust.com?
But .org, primaltrust.org, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I greatly appreciate your being willing to share with us today, and I look forward to referring some people that I know can benefit from this brain retraining work and primaltrust.org.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was rich and delicious, and I learned a lot myself.
Thank you for saying that. I'm glad it was useful, and be well. Dr. Cathleen King, Doctorate of Physical Therapy, is a leading expert in neuroplasticity education, mind-body healing methods, neurophysiology of trauma and attachment, and emotional regulation practices. Having personally healed from complex trauma and illness, Dr. King offers a path to healing through brain retraining and nervous system regulation. As CEO and founder of the Primal Trust Academy and community, she empowers others to find freedom from chronic illness, stress, and trauma.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.